Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, gang. So today we're going to be talking about the Spanish conquest of Mexico, and then next week we're going to talk about how basically what happens after Cortez comes in and lays the smackdown. All right, boom. So as always, starting with the key terms and hard words. So let's talk about the man himself first, Hernan Cortez, and then talk about the conquest of Mexico between 1519 and 1521. So Cortez, born in 1485, he'll die in 1547. He's born in Medellin, Spain, small town. He was born to a middle class family. His father was an infantry captain, but would rise to become the most famous and infamous of the Spanish conquistadors in the New World. So again, born in 1485, this means that he was only 8 years old when Columbus returns with news of the New World. And in eight-year-old Hernan, it sparked his imagination and his drive to make it to the New World himself. And so for the rest of the decade, so for the 1490s, young Cortez worked with that sole interest in mind. So, for example, he convinced his parents to send him to the University of Salamanca, Salamanca, at the age of 14 to learn the law, to learn logic, to learn Latin, to learn navigation, things that a conquistador, an explorer might need. And to help pay for university, because remember, his parents were middle class, Cortez worked as a notary public. Notary space Public, basically those guys who stamp forms and make sure everything is legal like. That'll be important coming up. Cortez, however, would get tired of school and returned home at the age of 16. So he was only in school for 2 years before he pulled a Cartman. Screw this, I'm going home. Now in Spain, Medellin was and is just a small town in northern Spain and nowhere near the water. So Cortez, feeling stifled, feeling frustrated, he acted like any other 16-year-old young man in Spain would do. He went out and had himself a good time. He also worked his family connections at getting away to the New World. He was a distant cousin of Nicholas de Ovando on his father's side, and he was second cousins with Francisco Pizarro. And so his connections managed to get him booked on passage to Hispaniola at the age of 18. So that would have been 1503. However, you gotta love it. He's 18, he's out there having fun, and he happened to have a dalliance with a married woman. And the night before he was supposed to go, he was with said married woman when all of a sudden, bang, 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 there's a knocking on the door. And young Cortez was hurrying up, getting stuff on and all that, and started climbing out the balcony, climbing out the window when he fell, hurt his leg as the husband was in the process of breaking into the bedroom. And his recuperation pushed his trip to Hispaniola back a year to 1504. Here he is on the left as a young man, and here he is on the right as a not so young man anymore. Now, upon arriving in Hispaniola, again, Haiti on the one side, Dominican Republic on the other, Cortez went about setting himself up in Hispaniola. And so through his family connections, Cortez was able to register as a Spanish citizen, which entitled him to a small plot of land to farm and to engage and take part in the encomienda system. And once he was established as part of the landed elite, Cortes worked his way into the colonial administration. At the age of 20, so that's 1505, Cortes was the notary, was appointed notary public of the town of Azua, A-Z-U-A, about give or take 100 kilometers away from Santo Domingo, which put him in a position to deal with all the legal documents resulting from Spanish government in that town. Now, he, at the same time, had an early career as a conquistador. And he got his career as a conquistador started by participating in the Spanish conquest of the rest of Hispaniola. And he was sufficiently successful in Hispaniola to continue enlarging his land holdings and the amount of indigenous labor he was entitled to. In addition, he made a name for himself amongst the Spanish elite. In 1511, he leaves colonial Hispaniola and travels with a gentleman we were introduced to a while back, Diego Velázquez, to Cuba and became his aide in the conquest of Cuba. And as Velázquez became governor of the colony, Cortes became the treasurer for the colony, essentially the chief financial officer. And Cortes continued his upward trajectory in Cuba. He was twice elected as alcalde, the magistrate of Santiago. He acted as the unofficial mayor of the city. And he secured the political patronage of Velázquez by marrying Velázquez's sister, Catalina. And so by 1518, 13 years after he arrives in the Caribbean, Cortes receives permission from Velázquez to go explore the mainland. 1518, Velázquez started approving expeditions to mainland Mexico, and Cortes said, "Hey, brother-in-law, bro, buddy, pal, friend, compadre, chum, amigo, let me lead one of the expeditions." And Cortes would receive a charter to lead the third expedition from Cuba to Mexico. Get to that in a second. So let's talk about the conquest of Mexico, 1519 to 1521. And so upon receiving the charter, upon receiving permission to go from Cuba to Mexico, Cortes set about gathering ships and men for his expedition throughout 1518. So he receives permission in 1518. He spends the rest of the year collecting ships, collecting men, spending money. And so by the time he was ready to leave in early 1519, Cortes had 11 ships with about 530 Spanish soldiers at the ready. And in addition to the soldiers, remember this is a colonizing expedition as well, he also brought along priests. He brought a doctor and a small number of women and freemen. So the additional people he's bringing along, that'll be important in a couple of minutes. And so remember, these expeditions were funded by the conquistadors themselves. So Cortes had sunk a large portion of his own personal wealth into setting up this expedition, including going into debt to Velázquez, his brother-in-law. In other words, by the end of 1518, Cortes was financially and personally invested in this expedition. And it was the investment in the expedition is part of the reason Why in February of 1519, Cortes leaves Cuba, leaves for the mainland, in spite of Velázquez withdrawing permission, taking back the charter for Cortes to leave. Now, Velázquez was worried that Cortes would get to Mexico, he would establish a separate power base for himself in Mexico, and that would leave Velázquez off to the side. So he said, I'm going to revoke, I'm going to withdraw my permission for Cortes to go. Aha, you cannot go anymore. And Cortes in February 1519 goes anyway. Legally, this meant that Cortes sailed off for the mainland as a mutineer and would be subject to punishment had he returned to Cuba unsuccessful. And punishments for mutineers ranged from imprisonment to death. So now, not only did Cortes have a significant financial and personal investment in this expedition, but his life may have literally been on the line. So Cortes is going to make two rather important stops before he gets to Mexico proper. He's going to stop at Cozumel, and he's going to stop in the Yucatan Peninsula. In February and March 1519, he's going to sail to Cozumel, Cuzumel, and then to the Yucatan Peninsula. And these were two important stops before he encountered the Aztecs. Cortes landed first at Cozumel Island, where he heard rumors of other white men living among the indigenous Mayan tribes. And so Cortes sent word to these friendly tribes requesting to meet with these men. Only one of them, Geronimo de Aguiar. There we go, Geronimo de Aguiar made the trip to meet with Cortes. Aguiar had been shipwrecked along with several other Spaniards as they left Santa Maria. That is, remember with Balboa, that's in Panama. He had been shipwrecked leaving Santa Maria on the way to Cuba in 1511. Aguiar was one of two survivors who managed to escape and make their way to friendly Mayan tribes. And during his time amongst the Mayans, Aguiar learned a number of Mayan dialects and offered to work for Cortes as a translator. So that's important stop number one. Important stop number two was the Yucatan Peninsula. Arriving in 1519, Cortes defeats a Mayan attack and establishes a temporary alliance with the Mayans in the area. Cortes comes across a Mexica woman who he named Marina. That's Marina down there. Now, Marina would come to play an important role in Cortes' successful invasion of the Aztecs, because Marina was able to speak Mayan and Aztec. Aguiar could speak Mayan and Spanish. So between these two people, this meant that Cortes had a semi-effective way of communicating with almost any tribe in the area and could effectively negotiate with tribal leaders. I said semi-effective way because if you've ever played the game Telephone, you know that things get lost in translation. But it was still a means of communication. So Cortes would speak to Aguiar in Spanish, who would then translate from Spanish to Mayan from Marina. Marina would then translate from Mayan to Aztec to the tribal chiefs. And then it would go back again. Tribal chiefs would talk to Marina. Marina would talk to Aguiar. Aguiar would talk to Cortes. Was it efficient? No. Was it effective? Yes. So now Cortes had a means of communication. So Yucatan would be along here, Cozumel would be along there. And so the place that Cortes lands, he names Veracruz. So if you've ever been to the port of Veracruz, if you've ever been to Veracruz, Mexico, that's where Cortes landed. Located along the Gulf of Mexico right here. Now you have to remember, technically and legally, Cortes was a mutineer. He led this expedition against the express wishes and orders of his superior, Velazquez. Now, you also have to remember that Cortes had some legal training. He had legal training in Spain, and he had experience in Azua, he had experience in Cuba. So he understood the inner workings of the Spanish legal system. So Cortes found a legal method of getting around being a mutineer. So what Cortes did, and I'm going to go back to the key terms. So what Cortes did was he came to an agreement with the Totonacs, T-O-T-O-N-A-C-S, a tribe on the east coast of modern Mexico that was an unwilling tributary state to the Aztecs. Now the Totonacs viewed Cortes and his men as a means by which to get out from under the thumb of the Aztecs, and worked with Cortes to establish the port city of Veracruz. At the settlement of Veracruz, Cortes ordered his men to establish the settlement and constitute a town council. Because remember, Cortes had brought along a small number of women and other settlers for just this contingency. These settlers come, they establish a town council. And then the town council unanimously elects Cortes as the Adelantado. The Adelantado. The Adelantado is essentially the advance man for the Spanish Empire. This was a position that contained the powers of the governor. If you remember back to the political structure I set up in a previous video. The Adelantado contained the powers of the governor, but existed outside of the Audiencia from which the expedition came. So the Adelantado was the advance man to go and effectively set up the groundwork, establish cities, for example, that had the powers of the governor but was outside the authority of the Audiencia from which it came. And by electing Cortes as the Adelantado, that meant that Cortes was outside of the authority of Velazquez and therefore could communicate directly with the Council of the Indies, directly with the Spanish crown, and effectively removed him from Velazquez's authority. Now, what Cortes did is, once he was established as Adelantado, he sent one ship with a loyal lieutenant back to Spain to report on what is happening, report back on the developments, to receive royal assent, to receive royal permission for his expedition. And the remainder of his fleet, the other 10 ships, were scuttled and used to build the shelter and build the fortifications at Veracruz. So he sends the loyal ship off all the way back to Spain and then scuttles the rest of the ship to build up Veracruz, which basically meant that if anybody was not happy with this, Cortes would go, too bad, so sad. We're in not friendly territory. We have a fortifications, a settlement here. You have a choice. You could either go out and good luck, or you could hang with us. For the most part, everybody decided to hang with Cortes. And so Veracruz became the jumping off point for Cortes and his relations with the Aztecs. Now, as with what happened with the Totonacs, Cortes would send out negotiators to sow dissent against Aztec rule in Tenochtitlan. And one of his big successes, hit one too many buttons. One of his big successes, so the Totonacs right up here, but one of his big successes was with the negotiating with the Tlaxcala Confederacy, Tlaxcala. So the Tlaxcalan or the Tlaxcalan Confederacy. This was a rival of the Aztecs, a loose confederation of about 200 towns who believed that they would be the next target for the Aztec Empire. And so they thought that they could use Cortes against the Aztecs, just as Cortes believed that the Spanish could use the Tlaxcalans. And so, November 1519. So here's the roundabout route taken by Cortes. The Tlaxcalans are here. So negotiations with the Tlaxcalans to jump on side with the Spanish. November 1519, Cortes and 3,000 Tlaxcala arrive at Tenochtitlan. And initially, Cortes engages in diplomacy with the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II. If you're doing any research on the Aztecs, you might also come across the name Moctezuma, M-O-C-T-A-Z-E-U. Sorry, Mocta, M-O-C-T-A-Z-U-M-A. Same guy. Moctezuma, same guy. And in meeting with Cortes, Montezuma supposedly pledged fealty to King Charles I of Spain and accepted Cortes as the king's legal representative. Here we have Cortes and his Cortes here, the Spaniards. This is Marina to translate. Montezuma came out, and literally his feet are not touching the ground outside of Tenochtitlan. And in order to prove his fealty, in order to prove his loyalty to Charles I, Cortes requested gifts of gold, as well as the removal of Aztec idols from the main pyramid, and their replacement with statues of the Virgin Mary and St. Christopher. Montezuma met these demands, suggesting that he had, in fact, accepted Charles I as his liege. Now, the stories that come out, particularly from the Spaniards at this time, is that Montezuma believed that Cortes was a representative of the gods. And so as Cortes is basically saying, hi, I want you to bow down and pledge fealty to my lord, that could be translated, again, remember, game of telephone with translation, could be mistranslated or misconstrued for Moctezuma to believe that his lord is actually a god, Quetzalcoatl, rather than a monarch. So we're not exactly sure with respect to the communication breakdown or the negotiations, simply because most of our sources come from the Spaniards. But the suggestion is that Montezuma is going along with it. Almost 2 weeks later, on the 14th of November, Cortes hears word that an Aztec garrison had attacked Veracruz, and several Spaniards were killed, including the commander of the garrison. Cortes uses this attack, or suspected attack, as a pretext to move against Montezuma, and seizes Montezuma as a prisoner and holds him for ransom. Montezuma essentially became under house arrest, acting as the puppet emperor for Cortes. And so things are relatively good for the next December, January, February, March, April, May. For the next 6 months or so, things are decent. Until the 20th of May, 1519, when an event happens called the Massacre at Tenochtitlan. So, in Tenochtitlan, we have Cortes staying there, several Spaniards, including one Pedro de Alvarado, Alvaredo. And Alvarado was one of Cortes's chief lieutenants. Alvarado ordered the killing of a number of priests and nobility in Tenochtitlan. Alvarado defended his actions on the basis that he heard rumors that the Aztecs were planning a surprise attack. So Alvarado attacked them before they could attack the Spaniards. Obviously, this prompted retaliation from the Aztecs, with Cortes, Alvarado, and the Spaniards trapped in the palace. Montezuma is killed when he goes to a balcony to try to calm down his people in an attempt to provide a peaceful solution to the problem, when a rock is thrown from the crowd, smacks him square in the head, down goes Moctezuma, and pretty much down goes any chance of peace between the Aztecs and the Spaniards. Cortes and his men are forced to fight their way out of Tenochtitlan and retreat basically the same way they came, all the way back to Veracruz. And so for the next couple of years, 1520, 1521, Cortes and his Tlaxcalan allies fought their way back to Tenochtitlan town by town. And from May through August 1521, Cortes had Tenochtitlan under siege. What also helped, not only was the 150,000 men from the Tlaxcalans, but also the fact that smallpox ran rampant throughout the Valley of Mexico, which allowed Cortes to finally sack Tenochtitlan and present the city to his Tlaxcalan allies. So, I'm going to stop this video here, sort of giving you guys the lead up to what's going to happen in the next video when the Spaniards take over Tenochtitlan, take over the Aztecs, and what they set up with respect to the New Spain, as they would call it. Now, before I go, hopefully you guys have watched this so far. I want to say have a happy Thanksgiving, and you guys have my permission. If anybody asks, say Dr. Patno told me to. Take Thanksgiving off. Do not do anything. Do not do any work related to this class. Just take a day off and relax. I will get a new video probably out Sunday or Monday. You can watch it if you want. You don't have to. Take the day off. You guys have earned it. So there will be only one video next week. Then the midterm exam will be on Thursday, the 15th. I will be getting out the list of potential terms to you guys this Friday, 8 October. All right, so I'm going to let you guys go there. I'm going to get back to grading. Go forth, slay dragons, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.